I started this video around 2 years ago. At the time, my goal was just to create a simple timeline of all photography video games. That's not every game that has a camera inside of it, but it's every game where the main focus and like the main mechanic is photography. And today, as you can probably tell from the runtime of this video, I did it. I got the complete collection. This is all of them, except for any that I might have missed or ones that didn't fit my criteria. When I say photography video games, I mean games that have some sort of camera or lens for capturing stills and at the very least give you control over when the shutter is released. Ideally, I want more control over framing and additional options, being able to set specific settings on the camera, but the minimum requirement that I'm looking for is to just be able to control the camera and the capture of images. The story of these games starts decades ago. Video games, not unlike photography, are a fairly recent art form as far as the whole scale of human evolution goes. Photography, as you probably know, predates video games, and it's by about a century, but both have a similar explosion in changes and adaptations when you kind of hit that 8-bit era. This is when Moore's Law is really in full effect. Although I guess some people say it's still in effect, I don't entirely understand it. We suddenly went from photos on film and playing games that looked like this to being able to capture hundreds, thousands of pictures instantly and play games that look like this, all from a small device in our pocket. The evolution of photography is really interesting. It's a story that deserves a lot of time and attention and care, but we're not going to be looking at that today. Instead, we're looking at the evolution of video games and how photography is embedded inside of it. We're going to be looking at over 100 different games, triple digits here, that make up this timeline. Some are going to be in great detail, some simply as a significant marker in time, and some we're just going to kind of touch on because they're boring or weird or a disgusting part of history. I'm going to kind of gloss over those parts, but they're in there. So thank you for joining me as we explore the complete history of photography video games. The first place that I'm heading to when I'm researching really anything these days is the internet. Just typing in what's on my mind and searching. Then begins the process of actually finding a good source for your information, which most often, if I want to be academic, is probably going to lead me to Wikipedia. Today, we're actually in luck, as there is a whole Wikipedia page on photography games, and it comments on the origins as such. The first known photography game is Nessie, published in 1984 for the Commodore 64, and in 1985 for the Atari 8-bit computers. It was written by Tom R. Halfhill and published as a type-in program in Compute's second book of Commodore 64 games, and in Compute's Atari Collection Volume 1. Here we have our origin, our Prometheus who stole Fujifilm from the gods, if you will. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a Commodore 64 or an Atari for that matter, so I can't physically play this game, or either versions of it. Thankfully, we have archival resources. These archival sources are truly the thing that made this video possible. I was able to find a video someone had posted to YouTube of the Atari version, and there actually is an online emulation of the C64 version. So what is the foundation of this genre like? Well, there's a lot that I like here as far as photography goes. Even though it's simple, you still have different options that emulate the difference between wide-angle and telephoto lenses, and the photo review is something that I think should always be a part of a photography game. Frankly, I'm pretty impressed with it, and I think it's a great beginning. It makes you feel like a photographer in some ways, and at the end of the day, isn't that the point? These two versions do look pretty drastically different though, and going back to the Wikipedia entry, the phrasing is kind of confusing to me for a lot of reasons. Normally when I think of a game being released, I think of, well, a physical release. Well, when I dug into these books, I was only more confused at what I was looking at. See, this I can make sense of as code, I suppose, but this is just numbers. I mean, zeros and ones, binary, that's the base of the universe or something, but you're telling me to be able to play this game on your computer, you have to type in all of these numbers in the exact right order and hope you didn't make any mistakes in your compiler or whatever, otherwise it's just gonna be bricked. I truly have no idea how long this would take someone to do. Typing aside, there's still some confusion. The game was first published in 1984, but when you look inside the Atari book, it says the game is by Tom Halfhill, and the C64 version is by Charles Brannan, with also a mention of Tom Halfhill. I can't help but feel like I'm missing something here. I tried looking through older archives of Compute magazine, but I wasn't able to find anything related to the game. Now, there are a lot of these magazines, so there is a very real chance that I missed something, as I also wasn't physically looking through them, I was just looking through web archives of them. First off, it is incredible that all this archival exists in the first place. I can't imagine how different this video would be if it wasn't for other people documenting all of this history. Truly, it wouldn't be feasible in the same manner. Sure, I'm able to get one book here, but I couldn't find a copy of the other, much less afford to buy all of these. But even with all this information, we still don't have a clear answer. The only other thing I could think to do at this point is to try and reach out to a primary source. And I was actually able to find that Tom has an internet presence. He has a website where he hosts a lot of different things that interest him, and I was able to reach out to the man himself directly. Now, this was about 2 years ago, and I sent off an email asking for some clarification, hoping that one day I'd be lucky enough to hear back from him. And you know what? Less than 24 hours later, I was graced with a response from Webmaster 1 himself, Tom Halfhill. The response he gave me was incredibly helpful, not only clarifying my questions, but giving me a lot of other details about the game itself, some of which I even understood. I appreciate this man so much for this. Tom, if you're watching, thank you so much for responding to me so quickly. I greatly appreciate it. And also, I'm sorry. Anyways, in his email, he said he couldn't find an earlier publication of the Atari version of the game despite it being written first. What happened instead was that his friend and colleague Charles Brannan wrote the C64 code later, but then it was published first due to the way that their book schedule was. He provided some additional background, saying this: Nessie was partly inspired by my hobby, photography, by my boyhood fascination with the Loch Ness Monster, and by a friend who wanted a non-violent video game for his young son. It occurred to me that a game could challenge the player to photograph a monster instead of shooting a monster. The animation would be much the same. By drawing a frame around the crosshairs, the game would simulate a camera viewfinder instead of a rifle scope. That's how Nessie came to be. I wrote it in my spare time while I was an editor at Compute Publications and essentially donated it to the company. Charles liked the game and suggested a Commodore 64 version. In those days, we often ported programs from one platform to another. We called them homogs, short for homogenization. I haven't seen his version in 40 years, but my recollection is that his graphics were better. This whole story is really such a fascinating look into a game development world so dramatically different than what it's like today. Games being literally published in the past, the obsolete form of type-in games, and some really cool ideation behind the origins of this genre. I love that the original spirit here is how to adapt mechanics that usually come with violence into a more peaceful manner that still keeps the same satisfaction when playing the game. It's no coincidence that we say point and shoot both for taking pictures and firing a gun. Now, this original email correspondence, the back and forth, was from July 2024. I fully meant to work on finishing this video shortly after talking to Tom, but other projects got in the way and I kind of just kept leaving it on the back burner. Now, close to 2 years later, finally returning to this project and getting reacquainted with all the materials and things that I was looking into, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that there was a whole new page added to halfhill.com discussing the game, a ripple which has also in turn been added to the Wikipedia page, which is why the entry now reads, "The first known photography game is Nessie, designed and programmed by Tom R. Halfhill for the Atari 8-bit computers in 1984, and converted to the Commodore 64 by Charles Brannan. The C64 version was published first in 1984 in Compute's second book of Commodore 64 games as a type-in program. The Atari original followed in 1985 in Compute's Atari Collection Volume 2. It's really fascinating to me to see all this happen happen kind of in real time, and I'm really impressed as to how the Wikipedia page even got updated with all this new information. I don't know if Tom reached out or if someone just happened to look on his website. I don't know, it's beyond me. Returning to this project and reading the updated wiki page, I felt a little crazy as I was like wondering why I was so confused in the first place. I hadn't saved a screenshot or anything when I was working on the project, and I had to find an older version saved on the Wayback Machine with the entry that I had originally read that led to me being confused at all. I probably also could have found it by looking through the Wikipedia entry updates, but I found it a little bit confusing and hard to digest exactly when the change took place. The future of the genre beyond Nessie is going to look very different, but these core mechanics of the frame and the way you capture your subject will really be a staple from here on out. And even this style of kind of creature photography is probably the most popular, or at least most prolific. The next entry into this timeline doesn't come until around 3 years later in 1987. And it isn't exactly a true entry. This video is focusing on games where the main mechanic is photography, but games that also feature cameras, they're part of the story, especially in these early years. Inheritance 2 is a game by Infogrames, which is a weird name. It's a simple point and click adventure game, and one of the items you can find is a camera, which you use to capture a still image to trick a security camera, allowing you to progress. That's it. That's it. There's nothing else. There is a weird section in this game where, well, you do this. But you don't take any pictures of that. Those games are coming later. The rest of it is a pretty straightforward point and click puzzle game, but this is kind of the first time that you're using a photograph you've taken in a game to progress. Also released in 1987 is our next true photography game. And I'll be honest, I was hoping I'd have more time before getting to an entry like this. But if we're moving chronologically, this is the next game up, and I guess that means our second category of photography games are pervert simulators. You know, art imitates life in this manner. As soon as we had photography, we started taking naked pictures of people, and as soon as we got photography games, Japan said, hey, you wanna see something fucked up? And the answer is no, I really don't. And I don't want to talk about this. The Shoujo Shoshinkan Special, the Double Vision, is a collection of 2 games that were never released individually as far as I know. Also, I don't speak Japanese, so I could be pronouncing all of this wrong. Moving School and Studio Cut. They were released for the MSX or X68000. Here's a description of these games. I can't tell you how much I hate this. Both games put you as a photographer trying to take photos of schoolgirls, where you must use your judgment to set exposure correctly, or use your judgment correctly and don't play this game. As the games progress, the option to use an automatic camera is removed, forcing you to correctly guess both aperture, shutter speed, film sensitivity, and if the flash should be used. Or at least that's what I'm told, because I haven't played this game. I really was not going to do that. With you actually adjusting the specific camera settings for this game, it is technically an evolution of the complexity of the mechanics. But I have no interest in talking any more about this game, and this really, this is not the last entry in the perv category, but I do actually think it might be the worst due to just the premise and subjects of the game. In fact, I can guarantee you right now that this will be the worst game that I talk about today, because if I find something else worse than this, I'm just not gonna cover it probably at all. So from full-blown debauchery, we smoothly transition to casual sexism with Lady Safari, released in 1988 for the MSX. In Lady Safari, you control your choice of explorer, dark-haired woman or light-haired woman, both clad in a tiny leotard and high-heeled boots as they explore the jungle and snap pictures of animals while avoiding obstacles. I almost didn't want to classify this game as a photography game because it seemed mostly like a side-scroller with a incidental sort of photography skin to it. It looks like you just need to make it to a camera and click on them, and functionally they could be anything else, like a pair of pants. But if you look close, you can see that there is a little creature creature scrambling around in the background over there, and it looks like you actually have to time it being in front of the lens, and that makes your timing matter, so I would say this is in fact a photography game. It's not a good one. It's not a good photography game, it's not a good game. Lady Safari becomes Safari Guns, a game released in 1989 on DOS, Amiga, and Atari ST. Something interesting about this era of different releases, as we saw back with Nessie, is just how different a game can look depending on what you're playing it on. Unlike modern consoles and PC, you know, the differences might be kind of slight, mostly in terms of like depth of texture and overall lighting quality. Back then, your game could look pretty much completely different with a totally different color palette. This is a quintessential shooter, so much so that you get both a camera and a gun. In the game, you are tasked with photographing animals and shooting poachers as you explore the safari. This game, along with our first games of the 90s, Darkman, which is not a true photography game, and Gekibo, Gekisha Boy, all you're really using the camera for is as a gun. You're moving your frame around the environment, making sure you have a target in your sights, and then are pulling the trigger, point and shoot. In Gekisha Boy, your film mirrors ammo as you need to find new cartridges to reload, and the camera acts the most like a gun it ever has, as you're able to directly interact with your environment while using it. Snapping photos of certain objects will cause them to change or entirely disappear. Taking pictures of windows can open them, and overall the photography elements here are just, it's not present. This game did get a less offensive sequel in 2001 on the PS2, but other than being in this new kind of 3D format, it's largely a retread of the same gameplay. The most notable thing about Gekibo and Darkman is that, other than the fucking gross game, these are the first games that actually photograph people and not just animals. With Darkman, you're photographing hostile enemies. Gekibo focuses on photographing people from a paparazzi perspective, something that would be far more expanded on in 1993's Paparazzi Tales of Tinseltown. The back of the box states, "The people you shoot don't die, they just wish they were dead." This game is awful, but in a charming 90s sort of way. It largely consists of full motion video clips, and the actual photography involves you watching a video and timing your shot just right so that you can capture someone in a compromising position. The most unrealistic thing here is that you only have 2 shots to do it in. The game can also be a little bit picky about what it counts as incriminating. It's almost like the game has a morality around it. Like, sure, it looks like they did this thing, but they didn't actually do it yet, so we couldn't print that. It would be a lie. After selecting your shot, if it's good, you'll get the opportunity to sell it to a different publication for varying amounts of money. I don't know that there's actually any benefit to not just picking the highest amount of money. The photography here is pretty limited. It's basically just a quick time event of clicking to take a picture at the right moment. But if you like cornball acting and just, you know, stupid things, you'll probably like it.
Wouldn't it be great if everyone looked just like me?
Professional loser.
But not everyone agreed on that at the time, with one reviewing publication writing, "Groan. Just in case the title doesn't tell all, the monthly What Were You Thinking award lands squarely on this double CD set." For computer first-timers, your parents say, Paparazzi offers something flashy and mildly amusing to showcase their new CD drive. For gamers, it offers a pair of attractive mirrored coasters. 1 star. In 1996, Dinosaur Safari was released. It has dinosaurs in it. I don't have a whole ton else to say about it. You travel back in time to capture pictures and videos of dinosaurs. So if you like dinosaurs, it's kind of neat, but it's a rough looking game. It plays pretty rough, and it's starting to feel like we're stagnating here. We've yet to really have any games that I would classify as good or fun, which are kind of important things in video games. Just hold on though. The end of the 90s would bring a revolutionary entry that is likely the most influential game since the genre's conception. In 1999, Pokémon Snap would change it all, but not by being the first photography game in 3D. That credit goes to Virtual Safari, released 2 years earlier in 1997. Virtual Safari was an edutainment game released for PC with the goal being to photograph different wild animals out in the wild. It's kind of redundant. To learn more about their stats and skills. As far as I can tell, the game was the first to feature a true zoom lens, something it desperately needed because the game itself ran in a window within a window. The actual spot where you're moving around the world and the game is taking place, it's so teeny tiny, probably to reduce the burden of rendering and make the game actually runnable back in the day. I mean, just look at how powerful of a PC you need to run this thing. I'm also a bit puzzled as the Wikipedia page mentions that the game was compatible with stereo glasses or other VR utilities, and the references that they have points to just a dead link. I don't see any mention of using 3D glasses or anything when I look through the manual or in the gameplay I've seen itself. So as far as I know, the VR that the game refers to is simply their way of selling the fact that the game is not 2D, something that was still pretty novel at the time and people maybe didn't really know what to call it yet. A far more novel concept and a significantly better game is Pokemon Snap though. It's not dramatic to say that this game, it really did, it changed everything for this genre. The move to 3D is essential, but as seen with Virtual Safari and other games we'll talk about later, simply having 3 dimensions does not make for a good photography game. In fact, if you're looking at Pokemon Snap from a strictly photographic standpoint, there really isn't much here. It's a very bare bones point and shoot game as far as the camera goes. There's no aperture settings, focus, or exposure. It does have a bit of a zoom, but it's really mostly about framing your shot and the things you do to set up those shots. What it does have going for it is that it's fun. In the game, you photograph Pokemon, animal-like creatures that I'm sure you've heard of. Unlike previous animal creature photography games we've seen though, these Pokemon actually have distinct behaviors. The way they act is interesting and it affects how you photograph them. The environments are varied and there's an additional puzzle element to the game. This puzzle often being interacting with the Pokemon to get them to do something different. You have items that interact with the world around you and Pokemon that cause their actions to change, which can lead to higher scoring photographs, thus rewarding you for interacting with the space around you. You've got a limited number of shots you can take on each round. We're still dealing with film cameras at this point in time, and at the end your photos are reviewed. You select the best photograph you have of each different Pokemon, and then all the points are awarded based off of composition and pose. This photo review and scoring are a total level above anything else we've seen at this point. A lot of that being because of the fact that it's in 3D. There's really only so much complexity you can capture in a 2D environment. I would also say this is the first game where you can capture photographs that are actually interesting or funny. Pokemon Snap is the first game where your camera is more complex than just a gun. And it's just fun. It's just fun. I can't emphasize that enough. This is the first game that I would actually recommend playing. The on-rails aspect is smart for early single joystick 3D as it allows you to fully focus your motion on the camera itself, and the game just holds up to this day. There's really no going back from here. Once we hit the 2000s, technology is rapidly changing, both for video games and cameras. Film loses its dominance and digital cameras become more accessible and more affordable. The sensor sizes get bigger and megapixels evolve rapidly. Video game consoles and computers are also becoming more and more powerful, able to render more complex 3D spaces. Our controllers evolve, joysticks doubling, but they only do that once because 4 joysticks, that would just be too many. And just as Pokemon Snap truly brought the genre into the next generation, this next entry brings the genre to new depths. It's honestly fascinating to me that one of the most iconic photography games, Pokemon Snap, is followed almost immediately by such a drastic change in genre. Technically, that change in genre is to Gunnar game. But if you ignore that, Fatal Frame comes very shortly after, being released at the end of 2001 on the PS2. Horror seems like kind of an obvious place to go with this sort of game. I think horror is one of those genres that will always take a bit of time to develop in any medium. You have to allow people time to settle in, to feel familiar with the kind of work they're experiencing so they can allow themselves to want to be scared. I think in modern gaming we've seen that horror really isn't limited much by graphic fidelity, but it does greatly benefit from 3D environments and greater sound depth, since it's all about your immersion. The early PlayStation really birthed horror games as we know them today. The influence of Resident Evil and Silent Hill can be felt far and wide, and both of those franchises are kind of in a renaissance at this moment, which is pretty exciting. Now, Fatal Frame certainly draws some influence with the third-person view, the fixed camera angle, and general survival horror experience. But instead of being armed with a gun or whatever melee weapon you can find, you're armed with a camera. When exploring, the game's perspective is in third person, but something unique about Fatal Frame is that to actually use your camera, you have to switch to a first-person view, looking through the viewfinder. This makes you confront the monsters in a different way than many other survival horror games. Instead of being encouraged to avoid them or run away, here you must face them head-on, actually looking at the monsters. The camera is sort of a hybrid between a camera and a gun, as is the case in really any game where a camera is used to defeat enemies. You have limited ammo, film, and you can find different types of film that have faster reloads or deal more damage. Thankfully, in the game, beyond just exorcising spirits, you can also find hidden ghosts outside of combat, which incentivizes your photography and exploration of your environment. One final thing worth mentioning is that while Pokémon Snap had you take pictures with the A button on the controller, here you're using a shoulder button, and any game that chooses to have their control scheme laid out like this is just gonna be better in my opinion. A great choice as it mimics using any camera. The game is a super unique entry into this history, and while not as influential as Pokémon Snap is, it certainly inspired many other horror games that followed it, some of which were just more Fatal Frame games. This series is prolific. It actually might have the most entries of any game series on this list. Fatal Frame, or Project Zero as it's known over in Japan, has I think 9 games in the series. There's Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly, Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented, Fatal Frame, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, Spirit Camera, Project Zero 2 Wii Edition, Fatal Frame Maiden of Blackwater, and then a remaster of Maiden of Blackwater, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, and a remake of Crimson Butterfly, which is set to release maybe right now while I'm making this video, or probably shortly after. Spirit Camera of all of these seems like the most unique, as this is a 3DS spin-off that uses AR, using the actual cameras that were on the 3DS. It's the frickin' future, man. I wish I could play all these games. Kind of. I'm a little bit of a coward when it comes to horror games, but this series seems really interesting to me, and maybe someday I will, but that day is not today. The next most interesting title to me after Spirit Camera is probably Project Zero 2, the Wii edition, specifically because it was adapted to the Wii and utilizes some motion controls, which I'd like to actually see how that works in practice, using the Wiimote to look around. Watching some videos of other people play it, it seems kind of clunky, but it's one of those things that you really have to feel for yourself. Unfortunately, it never made it over to North America, and while Maiden of Blackwater did make it over for the Wii U, it was only available on the eShop in North America, which, surprise, means that you just can't buy it anymore even if you have the console. There is a remaster of Maiden of Blackwater which is available on modern platforms, but I would rather just play it on the original hardware, something that you literally can't do without emulation. A lot of this series really wasn't available in North America until pretty recently. I've watched a lot of other people playing these games, and it doesn't seem like the photography itself changes a whole lot from title to title. The way it operates in combat does change, but for the most part, the camera is just kind of a frame that you're looking around in. While the Fatal Frame series is still having entries made to this day, after Fatal Frame 2, the next chronological entry into photography games is Paparazzi. Not to be confused with Paparazzi Tales from Tinseltown, or Paparazzi or Zoom Paparazzi in action. In Paparazzi, you photograph idols, and this is gross. Regrettably, it's also a pretty detailed photography system. When manually controlling the camera, you have the ability to adjust your focal length, focus, f-stop, and shutter speed. Also flash. You can change the lens on the camera and buy other upgrades, including software for touching up your photos and some very questionable looking substance. This is also a good point to maybe talk about cameras a little bit more in depth. I guess somehow up to this point, I haven't really addressed what a camera is. That's mostly because I figure everyone knows what a camera is, right? It's in everyone's pockets these days, but maybe people don't know about camera controls or older cameras. Older cameras that were pre-digital would shoot onto film. Although there was a weird period where some cameras shot onto floppy disks, in these games, cameras are either going to be film or digital. As far as I could tell, there wasn't a clear transition point when they switched between them. There's no one definitive game that suddenly is like, oh yeah, this is digital. It kind of just went away from film. I think this is because film is interesting to represent mechanically, having actual film be found for capturing photographs, versus digital is kind of endless in the way that it's conceived as far as games go. You're not walking around finding different SD cards or floppy disks in any of these games. And while some of them may still have a limited number of shots you're allowed to take, it isn't really addressed in the same way, and I think it's just because it doesn't feel as good to try and represent those mechanics in a game. If a camera is digital, rather you'd see it more in the settings, being able to adjust digital-only settings like ISO. As far as settings go for a camera, you're going to have aperture, which is a setting of the lens that controls how open or closed the lens itself is, allowing more or less light in, which also creates that depth of field effect. Aperture can also be referred to as f-stop. ISO is how sensitive your sensor is to light. This is something that's also present in film, but film is not adjustable. You have different film stocks that are either more or less sensitive to light. Shutter speed is how long your shutter is open. This is also dictating how much light is getting on your sensor or your film. And then digital cameras will have white balance, which is a temperature setting, making things either warmer or cooler. For the most part for games, you don't have to know this, though there are a few games that actually do highlight that. One other type of camera that is a film camera is Polaroids. Polaroid cameras are an instant film type of camera. When they capture that image, they're going to immediately spit out the picture, and it's going to develop very quickly without you having to do anything additional. Polaroids are very cool. Going back to Paparazzi the game, after capturing your photographs, they are reviewed and scored, and who cares? The game itself is really boring. As far as the subject matter, you're just capturing photos in a stationary setting, either in a studio or outside, and there really is nothing remarkable here. It's pretty hollow, just jiggle physics and nothing else. This game is not one of a kind though, as there's a whole subgenre of these idol games where the whole point is to photograph girls in a uncomfortable manner. These games range from creepy to just genuinely upsetting. The age of a lot of these characters seems really suspect, and frankly, I don't like these games. I don't really want to talk about them or have this be something on my channel, so we're gonna kind of brush past a lot of them. Some of them that could potentially qualify as photography games seem to be more visual novels, and the photography is just kind of used by the developers as a solution to the question, how do we make this more perverted? The only one that I find kind of funny is Finder Love, which had 3 different starting editions, each starring a different model. They sold box sets for each of these 3 games, and they included the game as well as a bikini identical to the one worn by the model in the game. It's really strange, but I feel like it's kind of a funny concept. Like, what if you bought a special edition of like a Mario game, and they're like, sweet, here's your copy of Mario Sunshine, here is a pair of Mario's gloves, and like, here's a Speedo. Like, thanks. What am I supposed to do with this? I don't actually want the answer to that question. I don't want to talk about these games anymore. Frankly, they don't interest me. They're all kind of boring, and a lot of the photography in them isn't really photography. I think Paparazzi is probably the most detailed. A lot of the other ones, it looks like you're just kind of pointing the camera and, you know, things happen in them. So I'm gonna include these in the complete timeline because I am trying to make a fairly thorough history here, but I'm not gonna dwell on this anymore. If you want to look into these games, okay. While we're at it, let's knock off a few games that are kind of edging onto the list, but not actually going to make it. These are games that have cameras or photography mini games, maybe a photo mode in them, but they aren't actually full-blown photography games or significant enough to discuss in depth. So I'm just gonna kind of rattle off a list here. We've got Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Dark Cloud 2, Cross Country USA Safari, Cross Country USA Photo Safari, Cross Country Canada Photo Safari, Playboy the Mansion. This one's not quite Gunnar Slop, not quite a photography game. It's just kind of bad. Lost Via Domus has a camera, not a photography game. Stuart Little 3. Did you know that Stuart Little is originally not actually a mouse? He is in fact just a boy that resembles a mouse in every conceivable way. I know it sounds like a lie and I didn't believe it when I was first told it, but it's the truth and there's no unknowing it. The Dead Rising series, Bully, Paparazzi. Not the ones I've already talked about, this one's a puzzle game. And if you make a photography game, don't just name it Paparazzi, don't name it Snap something, don't name it Shutterfuck or Aperture. You're not clever. It's been done. Also, there's a bunch of movies named Paparazzi, and some of them released the exact same year as these games, making finding information on them really annoying. Anyways, this is just a hidden object game, and I'm probably gonna keep complaining about terrible names. There's so many of them on this list. Epic Mickey 2, basically the photography equivalent of finding volt symbols. Outlast, this is a camcorder, not a camera. Videography, not photography. This is also eliminating Michigan Report from Hell, as much as I'd love to talk about it. Escape Dead Island, Life is Strange, shout out to all the lesbians watching. Firewatch, remember Firewatch? Breath of the Wild, Marvel's Spider-Man, Tears of the Kingdom, I assume. That new game, Pokopia, I don't know if I've mentioned that. That just came out, has a camera, not a photography game. Focus on You, this is a game that rides the line as it does have photography elements as one of the main mechanics, but it really seems more like a visual novel that happens to have photography sections. Animal Crossing New Horizons, I actually really love the camera in this game, and if you want to hear me just talk about it for 40 minutes, you're in luck. I made a video about that. I don't know why. Dahlia View, it's like if Rear Window was a puzzle game. Photogenic Mind's Identity. There has been a language barrier for a few of these games up to this point, but this is the first where it's so prohibitive. I'm kind of really not sure what this game is at all. It looks like you capture photos in some sort of infinite loop, collecting evidence of supernatural happenings, and the more that I think about it and the more I watch things on it, I guess it is actually a photography game, and it's going on the main timeline. The Star named Eos, it has a camera. It's not really a focus of the game though. Heartworm, this one has incredible graphics, aesthetics, and while your protagonist does wield a camera as their weapon, this thing is a gun. It's not a camera. If you have issues with where I'm drawing this line, this distinction on what is and isn't a photography game, I can understand that. The issue of whether or not just having a camera that does something makes a game a photography game is one I've kind of gone back and forth on a lot while writing this video. I've rewritten this section probably 6 times at this point, because here's the problem with saying that Heartworm isn't a photography game. If this isn't a photography game, then why is Gekisha Boy one? Why is Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy one? Kind of feels like either all of these games are photography games or none of them. It's similar to Fatal Frame in that you're banishing kind of spirits with your camera, but beyond that, it isn't the main mechanic of Heartworm. It is a survival horror puzzle game, and the camera is not the main focus here. Is it arbitrary to draw the line by the duration of the mechanic's presence? Probably, but it has to be drawn somewhere because Kingdom Hearts 3 is not a photography game. On the topic of this blurry distinction though, let's get back to the main timeline. Back in the early 2000s, we have Beyond Good and Evil. Now, I had never played Beyond Good and Evil before, and I kept going back and forth on whether I was going to place it as a photography game or a game that just features photography. I was watching a lot of people play this, I was watching reviews, and I was just not satisfied with how I felt about it, so I decided to actually play this one myself. Also, this is a good spot to address that I haven't played every single game that I'm talking about today. I've tried to play as many of them as I can, but not all of them. At first, when I started making this video, I was trying to collect them all and buy them so I could physically play all of them and like show them on camera, but the sheer volume of what I was dealing with eventually became too much to realistically do that, due both to the cost and just the feasibility of finding some of these games, some of them on old hardware, making it just unrealistic. So I have played a lot of these games, but not all of them. For the games I haven't played, I've done my best to watch very long amounts of other people playing through them, reviews, and just generally diving into all of the mechanics there so that I can still give a fair assessment. The nice thing about photography is that it's not overly complicated and there's not as much variation as if I was like trying to describe a bunch of platforming mechanics where you really need to understand how it physically feels. After going back and forth with Beyond Good and Evil, I decided this was one that I really did have to play for myself in order to get a feel for just what the balance was here. Ultimately, after playing a couple hours of it, I had my decision. And it might be a little bit controversial, but I don't think this is a photography game, at least not in the context that I'm talking about here today, which is games that are first and foremost about photography, games where their main mechanic is photography. If you consider this game to be a photography game, I'm not gonna fight you on that. It is a major mechanic in the game, it's fun, it's the main thrust of the story. But the reason that it isn't a photography game is just due to the fact that the photography, the camera, kind of takes a back seat for a lot of the gameplay. It's much more of an action-adventure game with puzzles, and then photography is kind of a little sprinkle on top of all of that. It does feel good though. The photography in the game is fun and satisfying, and I liked the way that my mind, whenever I saw a new creature, wouldn't immediately be like, oh man, combat. I'd be like, oh, I gotta get a picture. But that was more because of my way of playing it, versus if you're not really that interested in the photography, you could largely ignore it. You would still have to take pictures for story moments, but now there are other entries where this can kind of end up feeling weird, where there's games that feel less like a photography game than Beyond Good and Evil. A good example is the Toho project, I don't know how to pronounce that, I apologize, which have a few entries that are like photography themed bullet hells. There's Shoot the Bullet, Double Spoiler, and Violet Detector. In these games, you avoid bullet spray and have to capture a densely packed image for a better score. You can look at this and be like, how is this a photography game, but this isn't? For me, it's about the presence and duration of these mechanics. These games are worse when you think about photography in like a literal sense, but both of these games have mechanics that they define as photography and that I think qualify as photography, but one of them, it is the main mechanic, while in the other, it takes a back seat, often being forgotten or optional. That being said, one of these games is fun and the other one doesn't interest me at all. Do with that what you will. This is more about analyzing a genre than just describing good games. Let's get back to talking about games that are clearly photography games. Snapshot Adventures Secret of Bird Island is a horrible mouthful of a title, but I guess it's good that it has that, because otherwise this section would be only like 10 seconds long. In this game, you take pictures of birds, and it feels very similar to a hidden object game, but instead of using your mouse, you have a magnifying glass that I guess is a camera, and you have to find and capture specific birds, getting images of them. If you get a really good picture, it could be on the cover of a propaganda magazine. The game does have some nuance, as it cares about what the birds are doing, not just that they're in the frame, but unless you really like birds and live somewhere without any, I can't imagine anyone wants to play this game. Wild Earth Africa, or Wild Earth African Safari, is a game that was originally published for the PC in March of 2006 and then was ported to the Wii in 2008. I have the disc for it, but that's really all I can say. I think I actually forgot to play this one. We move from the African Safari to photographing the most dangerous game, celebrities. Zoom, Paparazzi in Action, was released in November of 2006 for the PC. This game takes more of a stealth approach to the photography, as you're tasked with infiltrating celebrity events and spaces to capture compromising moments. Or you might just be photographing people dancing and falling over, because that's kind of what the majority of the game is. This game doesn't feel fully realized, which is actually a shame, because the concept behind it is pretty fun and feels like one of the most unique games that we've seen up to this point. It's a little bit Hitman-esque in the way that you're kind of briefed and then told to avoid the guards. The problem is it actually really doesn't have any of the elements of spying or hiding in plain sight. You pretty much just get to walk around and stand wherever you want as long as your camera isn't out. Also, weirdly, your camera seems to be using a wide-angle lens when you'd think for something like this you'd want to take advantage of a telephoto or a longer millimeter lens to be able to get some distance from the people that you're photographing. In fact, if you're gonna just adapt a different genre of game, a photography game that emulates sniper gameplay would be pretty perfect. You'd have to find the perfect vantage point and wait to time your shot right, and then get out of a location making sure no one stops you to confiscate your photos or take your camera or something like that. It seems like one of the Paparazzi games or just a straight up espionage game could really capitalize on this sort of gameplay, but as far as I'm aware, it's yet to really be done. This is the closest we get. There's maybe submissions in other games that kind of act like this, but actually there might even be one in a Hitman game, I'm not sure, but there's no game where that's the exclusive focus. This game is pretty goofy with terrible voice acting, and it has some charm, but ultimately it's a pretty hollow game that I would love to see get a spiritual successor in the future. Now that we're approaching the 2010s, we're starting to reach a sort of boiling point. Games are getting made far more frequently with the emergence of more indie devs and smaller studios. More people are playing games than ever before, and with that, the number of new entries on this timeline is only going to go up. I mean, that's kind of how it would work anyways, but it's going up a lot more dramatically. This is overall good for the genre, but there also emerge more similarities among titles, and weak entries don't have the benefit of being propped up by historic significance. To keep things digestible, I'm gonna look at subgenres, or common themes that games start to share from this point out. The first one we're gonna look at is animal or creature photography, which have been probably the most present up until this point. The origins of the genre are in animal photography, as we mentioned, and even with all of those in the past, there's still about 30 more games that we haven't talked about yet. The next game on the timeline would be Endless Ocean from 2007 on the Wii. I say would be though, because I actually looked into it more and played it a little bit and realized Endless Ocean is not a photography game. It is a heavy breathing simulator with fish petting mechanics that happens to have a camera. I think the same can be said for Endless Ocean Blue World and Endless Ocean Luminous, the last of which has a 30-player diving mode, which is just pure excess. Beyond Blue is a similar game that I originally had on my list, but after looking into it, photography is even less present here than in Endless Ocean. Instead, you're scanning different animals, and I think it originally ended up on the list due to the fact that it has a photo mode, but that does not make this a photography game. Instead, if you want an actual underwater photography game, you're gonna be better off with Reef Shot from 2012. Its main focus is photographing underwater animals and artifacts, including ruins and objects that have sunk to the bottom of the ocean floor. The actual photography here is pretty limited. You're mostly framing things correctly by moving and zooming the camera and then capturing the picture. It does have this sort of QuickTime event for capturing your focus correctly. The atmosphere here is really immersive and cool. Exploring different areas such as trenches and ravines have a unique feeling to them. It's a pretty awesome setting for a creature photography game, and if this meets all of your niche interests, you're definitely going to like it. If you still have the itch to play a fish photography game but want to play something terrible, there's always Tropical Dream Underwater Odyssey, which has point-and-click photography and the most uncanny fish you could ever want to see. Moving back on land, we have Afrika, released in 2008, and this is another safari-style photography game, but the photography detail seems fairly complex and the animals pretty diverse in terms of their behavior in the game. Unfortunately, the game costs about $200, so I don't really see myself being able to play it anytime soon. But part of why the camera and lenses in this game are so complex is due to the game being published by Sony. They were allowed to use real Sony cameras instead of having to come up with alternatives, which just makes it that much more immersive. I feel like I see this game often being referenced similarly to Pokémon Snap, but having an open map, and this exploration feels like a good progression of the genre. Camera controls are much better than they were back in the 90s and start of the 2000s. Being allowed to freely roam can let you see more of the actual world and put you in danger, creating some tension as you get close to animals. The trade-off is you can wander off and get lost, not finding what you're supposed to photograph, but I think that's worth the risk for the added immersion. Eventually, it's good to come off the rails. Snapshot, released in 2016, is I suppose this is a game. yes, that is a very well executed photograph. Snapshot is one of the games that I ended up finding on itch.io, and towards the end of making this list, I remembered that I should probably check itch.io for games, and there are a lot. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them aren't going to be included into this list due to kind of the nature of them being a lot of demos, game jam projects, and I just don't think they're fully realized experiences. There are a few that I will mention due to them having exceptionally unique ideas or cool execution. Some of the games take a very hyper-realistic approach to the animals and environments that you're photographing, like Morels the Hunt and Morels the Hunt 2. ISO takes a more realistic approach to graphics, photographing a post-human Earth. Isle of Pan is a wholly alien world with alien creatures that, I gotta be honest, they don't look like they're worth the price tag. The UI in this game is atrocious, and while I wouldn't say the assets in the game are completely incongruous, they do all feel like they're pre-built and just kind of thrown together in an uninspired way. You might use the term asset flip, but at least it's got a pretty incredible running animation. In comparison, Cellular Harvest is also not much of a photography game, only having a simple point and shoot mechanic, but it creates a more consistent world for you to immerse yourself in. The planet and creatures occupying it feel cohesive, and there is a clear vision and color palette present here, though the game itself feels kind of vacuous. I've truly never had to find more synonyms for the word empty before making this video. The Last Explorer is another otherworldly game with a bit more emphasis on the mechanics of the photography and some more diversity to your in-game travel that makes it feel more like an exploration game. It doesn't feel like a good-looking game, but it is what it is. A similar kind of world can be found in Spectrogram, which is a free game on itch.io, though this game also looks to barely be a photography game, with the focus being more on just exploring this strange world and identifying the creatures in it. Down the Mountain is another itch.io game and was originally made for a 48-hour game jam that kind of has a fun storybook aesthetic to it, but I think this game should also show you why I'm not going to be talking about a lot of these game jam projects. There's just not that much here. Weird Meese is a small photography game that has moose that wear hats and do other things. Speaking of animals wearing hats though, Pupperazzi has a lot of goofy little dogs wearing hats and doing tricks in it. I played this game a while ago, and I originally wrote an entire script for a video about it back in 2022 because I was just so excited when I first played it. This is one of the best games that the genre has to offer. The photography mechanics are not overly complex, but still have a nice variety with unlockable film stock and lenses that modify how your pictures look, not necessarily how you take them. In the game, you're given different tasks, mostly revolving around capturing different photographs of dogs. You need to get a specific shot of them doing a action or being in a specific place or having a certain reaction. Capturing these photos and also posting them will increase your follower count, and you will also save up a currency that you can use to unlock the upgrades. It's pretty fleshed out and has a decent number of different environments. I kind of wish there were more or that they were bigger, but there's still enough that it doesn't feel too small, and having the ability to visit the locations in different conditions and different times of day does help flesh it out and make for some cool photographs. It really isn't challenging, but I did find it very engaging, and back when I first played the game on Xbox, I did end up 100%ing it. It really scratched that itch in a way that no other game had at that point. As I mentioned with the objectives, they're not hard to complete, but the photos are reviewed in a way that actually kind of requires you to put in some effort into the framing. I would say Pokémon Snap is more challenging overall, but Paparazzi has more downright whimsy. I can't take a goofy shot of a sandshrew from this angle, but in this game I can. The reason I bring up Pokémon Snap again is that I do think Paparazzi was the first game I played that really kind of challenged it in terms of doing something different but equally fun in this sort of creature space. The freedom and lively world that the game builds out really do make it stand out among its peers, and I think that the through line I'm starting to see with these games is that the complexity of the camera really isn't as important as how the game encourages you to use it. It's almost like games should be fun first and foremost. Nuts is a very bright game that opts to forego texture, instead using color and outline for its world. In the game, you are tasked with performing a survey of some squirrels. It kind of isn't a photography game though. Yes, you set up a camera, but you're mostly using them to observe a video feed and then capture still images from that to send back to your research counterpart. The game seems fine, but I'll be honest, I got annoyed with it pretty early on when I captured a photograph, but it said it was wrong. Because apparently I had to move the camera further forward. Why give me the ability to zoom in if it isn't going to recognize the zoom? Whatever though, this game doesn't count, so I don't have to keep playing it. If you're really into butterflies and a capybara, there's Flutter Away. For other bugs, there is Shutterbug. Shutterbug is a short web-based proof of concept, but I like the way it utilizes transforming your browser window to create movement and alter the frame. It feels like a slightly more creative I Spy type of game, and I just think it's a cool mechanic worth mentioning. For things that eat bugs, there are a handful of bird photography games. Marvelous Bird Photography is a short little game on itch.io. There's not a whole lot to say about it, but it could be a fun way to kill 20 minutes at work. Alba Wildlife Adventures isn't exclusively a bird photography game, but it does seem to be packed full of them. It's also one of the few games that explicitly has you taking pictures on your phone, which is fitting for the child protagonist. Casual Birder is a game released for the Playdate, which is a pretty unique handheld console that looks retro but has the modern technology of the crank. It definitely is a gimmick, but it seems like it can be a fun one if developers use it right. In Casual Birder, it's used to help you set your focus for taking pictures, which seems like a nice way to get that tactile feedback, kind of mimicking how you use a camera. It's not exactly as realistic as just using a shoulder button for the shutter, but I still like that interaction that it gives you. It's definitely one I wish I could play and judge for myself. The last bird game here is Torapon, which is a cute, crunchy little game where you photograph birds around your house. I really just spammed taking pictures and got a bunch of followers in a matter of minutes, so I'm not exactly sure what you're supposed to be doing here, but there really doesn't seem to be much more, honestly, than a few relaxing minutes. Or terrifying, depending on how you feel about birds. Froggies at the Zoo crashed every time I tried to launch the demo. I guess given enough time, there will be a photography game dedicated to probably every single animal. That's why we've got games full of fictional animals though. There's Beckus, which is kind of like if Slime Rancher was a game about photographing Neopets. Alicon seems like the aesthetics of Spore and Spyro had a baby, and that baby became a photography game, but since neither of the parents are photography games, they didn't really encourage those qualities to shine through, and it's just sort of a puzzly creature game that happens to have photography elements in it. Beasts of Maravilla Island doesn't have particularly remarkable photography mechanics, but the environment does stand out. It has a really fun sense of scale and creative fauna, making it seem like an interesting world to traverse. The creatures, they're not anything insane, but they have fun, distinct designs. Penko Park is a sort of spiritual successor to Pokémon Snap. It's another on-the-rails creature photography game, but it's a bit more spooky and creepy. The creatures are odd, and the art style has a sort of paper cutout feeling to it that works really well here. There's a whole backstory behind the scenes of Penko Park and what happened to it, and I've gotten a good amount of playtime on it. The gameplay is very reminiscent of Pokémon Snap, which isn't really a huge problem seeing as this was released 20 years after the original. But right after Penko Park, new Pokémon Snap would be released to show everyone just what a juggernaut can do with the photography genre. The answer is not much, I guess. Or at least nothing new. It should really be called more Pokémon Snap because the game isn't much more than just a retread with modern graphics and an updated Pokédex. It isn't like a bad game, but I really only played a couple hours of it before losing interest entirely. The first Pokémon Snap being on rails made a lot of sense at the time for where video games were in that moment. And I think returning to the series 20 years later, there's no reason that you have to do the exact same formula. Though I suppose I'm talking to a wall if I really think Pokemon is the series to be innovating on their installments. It's just such a bummer since having so many new Pokemon could really make this an exciting open world safari where you focus on collecting and completing a dex, maybe small capture mechanics, or you start out with a team that can learn HMs to help you further traverse through the world. I just wish Nintendo, or I guess the Pokemon team, dreamed a bit bigger with this series.
Whoa! no! Those flames changed color!
Similar to Pokemon, Photogeist Albums is the last creature photography game we're going to talk about, probably. This is a game heavily inspired by Pokemon, but not Pokemon Snap. It's not a finished game so far, or at least only the first chapter is out, but it seems to be a pretty substantial start. I think I played it for over an hour, and I was not quite past 10% through by the time I stopped playing. Though I did end up wasting a decent bit of time running around because a character I needed to talk to had just despawned and did not come back until I relaunched the game. Aside from the bugs, I did really enjoy my time playing it. In the game, you capture Geists, strange little pocket monsters that you can then do combat with to either banish or appease other Geists. You capture them by taking their picture, and the whole setting of this game is nice and spooky with thick, blocky polygons. The combat is not the most unique or terribly engaging, and the photo aspect is really minor, but I still think there's a ton to like here. The actual pictures are really just point and shoot with your camera, having a sort of recharge between shots. It's really all about quick shooting from the hip, as if you get in the range of Geists, they will start to charge you. It's definitely more spooky in setting than actual content. It's not a scary game. It just has supernatural and sci-fi elements, while overall being light and kind of goofy in tone. Something that is about to change as we move into the next category, which is horror photography. That's right, Fatal Frame is not alone, and there are a whole slew of other creepy camera capers to be had. That was a cornball line if I ever wrote one. Dreadout released in 2014. It's time for Gen Z to get scary. In this game, you'll use your phone to banish spirits and uncover hidden secrets. Kinda sounds familiar. It does have Indonesian influence as opposed to Japanese. As far as I can tell, there isn't a whole ton more depth to the camera, but otherwise, I'd have to spend more time with it to see if there actually really are any distinctions between this and Fatal Frame. Shutter, not to be confused with Shutter Story, which isn't out yet, or confused with Wreck Shutter, which everyone just calls Shutter, and was also a game where you have a POV of a camera, but that was more Outlast than Fatal Frame, so it doesn't count. Anyways, this Shutter is a poorly named and poorly made game where you play as a little robot rolling around snapping pictures of ghosts. The UI looks terrible, the motion of the robot is super glidey and unimmersive, and the sequel, I guess, doesn't look worse. Between games like this and 1000 Heads Among the Trees, I'm actually surprised there aren't more of this sort of terrible horror game. I guess there are a million other easier ways to make people scream, and also going for a video camera or security camera motif is far more popular. Hauntsville is pixel Fatal Frame. Also, one pretty much completely overlooked part of this whole timeline is mobile games, specifically phone games. The problem is there isn't often a good way to find documentation on a lot of these games, as they disappear over the years due to being removed from app stores, from not being updated to newer iOSs, or any other reasons. One of the games I wish I could play myself is UFO on Tape First Contact. It's not exactly a horror game, but a bit more sci-fi, as this game has you hunting aliens and snapping pictures of them with your camera. An interesting thing is that you use your phone's gyroscope to control the camera, a mechanic that is present in a few other games, but overall I would say it's a little underutilized for photography games, but maybe that's just because it's kind of a gimmick. Brukel is an interesting game that's sort of a photography walking simulator, as it tells the story of a 92-year-old woman recounting her childhood, with the game taking place in the now abandoned home that those stories are set in. It's an interesting concept, but the controls for the camera are very bad. It's awkward and clunky, being over-reliant on the mouse, and I feel like I'm a 92-year-old controlling it by awkwardly dragging my finger around, trying to point at the right spot. Martha is Dead is not a full-on photography game. More so, it's a horror game with a few little photography sections, but one of the more interesting things in it is the role of actually developing film, something that a few other games have in them, but is really cool to actually see showcased. After Dream is a side-scrolling 2D puzzle game. The camera in the game operates as a sort of lens of truth, revealing hidden objects and being used to solve puzzles, kind of arbitrarily. The camera is not much of a camera and feels more like a point-and-click element, and the game's palette is pretty bleak and unappealing, and I don't care for these average-height Slendermen. The game isn't without any fun designs, and I do like the utilization of the camera flash as a tense makeshift flashlight. It's not the only game to do it, but it's more competent and interesting than the game Photo Capture. Congrats, you beat a free itch.io game. Paragnosia is like Fatal Frame meets Five Nights at Freddy's. There's something so comical to me about having holes hacked in every single room so that this track can be installed all across the house. Also outside of the house, buddy, you're not getting your security deposit back. Photo Shooter is a small itch.io game that was originally made for a Game Jam project, and while I'm mostly brushing over these, this one stands out to me as it's just such a literal game. I've compared many of these cameras to guns in this video, and none take it more seriously than Photo Shooter. It also has this large, empty void of a world that you move around in. Definitely a byproduct of its quick production, but an empty void can have some intention behind it. In fact, there are a whole slew of games that I would categorize as liminal photography.
Only a few of these left in existence. I'm certain of that. And I'm giving it to you.
Interior Worlds is probably the most liminal of these games, as it's the most interested in replicating real-world environments beyond just natural spaces. It's definitely a bit Backrooms-esque in how the spaces feel uncanny and seem to go on a bit more than they should. They're also kind of creepy, even though nothing is actually going to attack you or harm you. There's still inhabitants in these spaces, which is a lot of fun. It's a great example of how isolation can freak a player out. The actual photography here is enjoyable and straightforward, with you using your camera to capture these sort of ghost figments. The visual style here is really enjoyable. Even if you're not big on dithering and pixel noise, you can turn it off and still find the game full of good environments and nice colors. It's dark and dreary at times, but also knows when to use these bright neons to make things visually pop. There's also a really nice extra detail here that since you're using a film camera, you actually have to advance the film before your next shot. It's something that, even though the camera doesn't actually seem to use any film, adds that little bit of immersion. Now, these sort of liminal photography games can really range in quality. It makes me think back to my time in art school. Sometimes a project just didn't turn out well and you didn't put a lot of effort or time into it, and you'd hear students use this one miracle phrase. It's experimental. No. It isn't. It's just bad. There is sometimes an intention behind this. People will sometimes make art that is intentionally grating or uncomfortable in order to elicit a response. I don't think there's any intention behind these games though. Photo World and Photo World smooth corners are just bad. They look like big empty vessels of nothing and beg the question, why? Photo World is a calm travel game, the essence of which is to take beautiful photos. Well, unfortunately, that's literally impossible from looking at all these trailers. I'm sorry, I don't believe that someone put actual care into these games. And if you did, they're awful, and you should feel bad for asking money for them. Somerholm is a similarly random generated island for you to take pictures on, but the island itself at least looks significantly more appealing, and it's clear at least some level of intention went into making this experience. The camera really doesn't seem that thought out though, and the ways that you can modify it feel more like you're toggling graphics settings than changing anything in a tangible camera. There is some more to this game than just walking around, but sometimes a big empty island is just an empty island. Frankly, if you're going to do a game like this, it has to be fun to explore without the camera. Stroll provides you with some pretty diverse and interesting environments which actually look fun to photograph. The camera also has a decent amount of control, which is really needed when your other mechanic is just strolling. The biggest thing lacking in these other games though is sound design and music. Proteus is maybe my favorite game where you just do nothing. There is no point, but a big part of why that game is kind of fun to spend a few minutes in is just how complex and intentional the soundscape is. Things within your environment, where you're standing, what you're around, all are musically motivated. And just wandering can kind of feel like you're enjoying a little symphony, a little massage for your brain. It's not just deafening silence. Speaking of silence, one of the games I checked out was Shutter Seeker on itch.io, which is generally a big empty void, aside from some birds that were very loud in my right ear. The environment seems like it could be fun to explore further, but they start you out with this terrible camera and you have to sell photos to get a better one, with the problem being that it seems like the value of the photos is super arbitrarily decided. I took a bunch of the same photos of this monument and some of them weren't worth anything, and it doesn't feel clear to me why. Maybe the framing, maybe this camera just sucks and no one wants to pay for these pictures, in which case I guess I'm stuck living out here forever. If you want an experience in nature, Lushfoil is going to be the way to go. Lushfoil Photography Simulator is probably as good as it gets if you want realism in your photography game. This was one that I really wanted to get my hands on, and it made me realize that someday I'm actually gonna have to upgrade my PC. In this game, there are several different environments that you get to explore and wander around in, taking pictures. There are some slight goals as you try to match photos and locations in the game, recreating pictures and finding collectibles in order to unlock new environments, but for the most part, you're really just left to your own devices. This is the most detailed photography system I've encountered. It kind of can't get any more detailed than this, as you're given full control over the camera, focus, shutter speed, aperture, white balance, ISO, what lens you use, and pretty good control over framing. It isn't perfect. It seems a little odd to me that you can't just like default crouch in the game, and when you kind of adjust how you're framing the shot, it's always from a fixed height, kind of pivoting with a little bit of control, but not as much as I would like. The environments themselves are stunning. This game looks modern. If you see any frame stuttering or slowdowns in my footage, it's probably my fault. My PC, it looked great when I was running it, but when I was recording it, it was showing its age a little bit. If you have zero interest in photography and just want a really detailed hiking simulator, you'll probably also like this game. It's one of the few games I own where I genuinely kind of want to get a VR headset to be able to experience this even closer. I'm sorry if I'm just gushing about this experience. I really was blown away when I first played it, as it really made me feel something that most of these other games hadn't. I love photography, I love experiencing art that people have put effort into, and this is something that definitely had a lot of love put into it. My only major complaint with it is that there's these really cool unlockable cameras that you can find around the environments, like a camcorder or an old digital camera, but as far as I can see, you can't actually use them outside of the environment that you discover them in, which seems like a huge waste. The camcorder is so cool, and I really would love to like walk through the Japanese forest using this camcorder. Maybe later on in the game you're able to unlock it, but as far as I played, I wasn't able to, and it just seems completely unnecessary to lock that into the environment. It's not perfect, but certainly it's the best at what it's doing. This one really has to be experienced for yourself if it seems like something you like. Dear Future brings in a sort of social aspect into the empty void as you inherit your camera from a previous player, and messages litter the city left behind by others. You're limited in terms of what messages you can leave though, so it's not going to be anything super crazy. The world itself is very empty and not the most appealing to photograph, which is a shame because the photography mechanics themselves are very robust and feel good to use. As you wander around the city, you're exploring and able to restore artifacts, which I really only found to be making bridges come back to reality, but it was fun when I finally restored one and realized that all the names I'd been seeing up to that point were actually players and not just the names of islands. The game takes place over a limited cycle of time, and once your 12 in-game hours have expired, it's over, leaving you to select one photograph to pass on and then be done. When I relaunched the game, I wasn't able to start again, which I thought was really cool, leaving this as a singular experience to enjoy it once and move on. But then I clicked the credits and I could start it over again, so maybe that wasn't the intention, or this is a glitch. I don't know. There's some hints of a story, some misuse of power, and when I looked on the itch.io page, it references written descriptions of economic and political violence, including mass attacks, stabbing, drowning, policing, cults, dehydration, allusions to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the 2020 California wildfires. I will say, I understand the wildfires. As you're walking around, there's this kind of orange haze over everything that feels very similar when you're outside in the actual smoke of a wildfire. I think it's interesting, and it shows the intention behind exploring a deeper meaning behind the game, something this game has in common with our next bunch, which is more story-driven games. In fact, I would say there's a whole collection of games that are outright political in the messages they portray through photography. In some ways, I feel these games are the sort of natural evolution of the Paparazzi games, although maybe some of them are even made in direct response to them. While Paparazzi games seek to show you how you can exploit the camera for profit by capturing people in compromising positions, there are a handful of games that explore that idea deeper, showing just how powerful a single image can be. The most simple of these games is We Become What We Behold. This straightforward experience is only about 5 minutes long, and you can play it right now in your browser if you want. It kind of feels and looks like an early internet Flash game, and frankly, it's subtle like one, in that there really isn't any subtlety here. The game portrays the escalation of division and violence from how it's portrayed in media. You can view it as a critique of for-profit media and a few other things, but ultimately it's an unsubtle, in-your-face piece of art about the danger of both what is photographed and what is broadcast, and I like it for that. It definitely shows the idea of a frame being powerful in how it adds or removes context from something. This core idea is something that I think could really be explored more deeply and expanded on in the genre. Maybe a mix of a Paparazzi game and Nightcrawler to explore the more complex side and the weight that a photograph can truly have. Unfortunately, I don't really think any of the story games to follow really manage to fully do that. There's this tiny little game on itch.io called Mystery Meat, and while it definitely fits more appropriately under the horror section, the premise behind it of breaking into a meat processing facility to uncover some sort of secret or expose bad practices is a good premise. It just sucks the game isn't any good. I mean, frankly, the better version of this game is just Outlast, which focuses more on videography than photography, which does make more sense in a modern context, as if you want to capture something more incriminating, you're probably going to want video over photo, but I do wish that a photography game would explore this more. The role of journalist really isn't explored enough in these games. I did find a game jam game called Freedom Through a Lens, but it's mostly unnatural dialogue and it shows its roughness as a game jam project. There are, of course, the Spider-Man games that focus on Peter Parker a bit as a journalist, and they have photo elements, as it is his job at the Daily Bugle, but where it's the standalone Peter Parker game, where he just takes pictures and pays his taxes, I guess it just isn't high enough stakes, because there are some games that explore the role of a photographer in war. We have 1111 War Retold, which allows you to have a camera on the front lines of World War I, and Embedded, which is just a terrible, terrible name for a video game. Try searching up Embedded online game, or Embedded itch.io game, or Embedded in-browser game. You won't find this. I promise you, you're never gonna find Embedded when you search up its name. Anyways, the game follows a photographer during the Vietnam War, a notoriously uncontroversial war that the US was involved in. The implementation of photography in the game is interesting in that it has you photographing historical events and then selecting which pictures to publish, with the subject matter and framing of the photo leaning towards an anti-war or pro-war sentiment. The thing I don't care for is that the game looks like a Disney ride through real-world tragedies, and I think you could get the point across by alluding to the events without making real people's deaths look corny. Maybe that's arbitrary, because I don't think I'd have the same criticism if the game just looked better, but if you're dealing with something like this, I think you have to have a little bit of tact, otherwise you kind of lose the point. Warco is an unreleased game from 2011 that would have been more of a videography game than a photography game. The idea was to put you directly into a war zone as a journalist. The idea behind it was to help real-world journalists prepare for being in actual combat. But from looking at the trailer, I'm not sure it really would have been successful at that. And again, it wouldn't be a photography game, but I didn't think I'd ever get another chance to mention it. 1979 Revolution Black Friday is a choice-driven narrative game that brings players into the brooding world of a nation on the verge of collapse. You play as Reza, an aspiring photojournalist, and make life and death decisions as you survive the gritty streets of Iran in the late 1970s. Oh, the US? I guess we declared war on Iran. Less political, but more just story-driven, we have Once Again, which is really your quintessential visual novel game. Not an experience I'm a fan of or really interested in at all. If I wouldn't want to read the story in the first place, I really don't want to play it as a video game. Having me do math problems and drag my mouse across the screen, it's really not engaging to me. Dragging photos around in baths to develop them is kind of fun, but the photography itself makes no sense. You're dragging two sliders to be in the right spots to set your focus. It's not how any of this works. After playing this game, I'm realizing that story-driven games, they really need the full time and attention of a full playthrough if I want to give it a fair shake. But even then, well, they're so personal, right? I shouldn't just be judging them based off their photography. And no, this is not me just trying to kind of skip past talking about these games. Maybe. In Off the Rails, you take French pictures to learn about the past with a simple camera that has a focus and a zoom. Season, A Letter to the Future, is an art school scrapbook simulator that has a simple camera that has a focus and a zoom. If you want more camera control, there is Filmography. Unfortunately, the people in this game are also terrifying. Now, other games, of course, have stories in them, but these were just the games where it felt like the story itself was the main point. There are some other games that could probably just as easily slide into this category, but that's not how I made the video. So, moving on to our next category, we're looking at puzzles. Snapshot is a side-scrolling puzzle platformer from 2012 in which you play as a robot traversing through levels using your camera to rearrange objects in order to be able to progress. In this game, your camera is mostly used as a way of manipulating your environment and moving objects. The camera is essentially a screenshot tool in how it functions. Randy's Camera is a very similar game with slight variations in the mechanics, but the same core ideas of using the frame to move and reveal objects to help you progress through a 2D stage. Somehow, with an even worse name than Snapshot, is Photographs, published in 2019. This is a game with a photography motif, but the only actual semblance of photography is a viewfinder that you use to find the next puzzle game you're gonna play. It doesn't function as a camera. If you want a good mix of fun photography and small puzzles, Tome is the way to go. Though the puzzles are more abstract in that you're helping decipher what people want photographed, as well as finding hidden things around the map, Tome is another entry into photography games it's outright a good game. It's got fun little characters, a decent variety of environments, and the camera is enjoyable to use. I would say you can compare this game a lot to Paparazzi. In Paparazzi, the quests are a lot more straightforward though, and simple to solve, whereas Tome makes you go a little bit further in interpreting and keeping an eye out for problem solving. But it does lack in the actual photography, not being as fun as Paparazzi. The environments are pretty much all black and white, so it just doesn't have that same depth. It's still enjoyable though, and you can get some very fun shots, but the lack of color in the game definitely limits what a lot of the filters can be, and some of the character models could stand to be a little bit sharper. While the overall mechanics of the camera aren't as fleshed out as some other games, I do want to mention that I really like how punchy it feels when you take a picture. I haven't talked a whole ton about sound design somehow up to this point, despite us being, we're well past 60 minutes at this point, but I think a huge part of whether or not your camera feels good to use in a game has to do with the shutter sound. Tome has a nice shutter and an extra Polaroid dispensing sound that really gives some weight to the act of taking a picture, something that just feels good. Once again, comparing the genre to a shooter, similar to how gun mechanics need to have a good recoil on the firing and a nice sound to give it that weight. This shutter sound is so cathartic to people that camera manufacturers will add it into cameras that don't have a physical shutter, so that you still get to hear that sound, letting you know that, yeah, a picture was taken. Tome is definitely one of the games I spent the most time with. It's great to play on the Steam Deck and just unwind with after a long day of also gaming, and I'm really looking forward to its sequel once it's released. Another big hitter in the photography genre is Umurangi Generation. This is another title similar to Tome and Pupperazzi. In the game, you are placed into levels with a set of objectives to photograph in order to progress. As you complete them and progress through the stages, you're given upgrades in the form of lenses and additional settings that you can manipulate after capturing your photographs. The game took me a little bit to get used to, but once I settled in, I found it to be really engaging. The music in the game does does a lot to keep up this kind of consistent energy as you flow through the levels, and while you don't complete them in a specific time, if you want to complete all the bonus objectives for additional upgrades, you're going to want to be quick. The environments are designed with intention, the whole game has a sort of cyberpunk counterculture vibe to it, and you're given plenty of control over your camera and its settings, with everything laid out in a way that doesn't feel burdensome. The prompts can be a little bit vague, but that does encourage you to go and snap more pictures. This game really doesn't feel like you're doing an I Spy with a camera lens. Part of the fun is that there can often be multiple ways to achieve the desired photograph, and I definitely had moments where I had to position myself just right to get a shot perfectly, and then moments later, I'd realize that the subject I needed to capture was also in another spot, way easier to photograph. If you want a fun photography game, this one is at the top of the list. Going back to awful names for your game, Shutter is a free game that asks the question, what if Superliminal was kind of Portal? The whole game has a pretty sleek 70s design, and in it you solve tasks in a facility that is totally not Aperture Science because look, everything's orange. Aperture's not orange. I don't want to rag on it too much because look, it's a free game. It just really didn't strike me as having the subtlety that it seemed to want, and it's way too eager to be like, oh, this corporation is bad. Like, yeah, it's a fictional science research lab. Of course it's evil. Maybe try telling an original story. The mechanics of the game revolve around taking pictures of blue objects and then reframing them to be larger or smaller to fit the puzzle requests. The camera itself is really just sort of a gun frame, and I do think that this would actually benefit from having a first-person view. It might slow down your ability to quickly capture things and place them, but I think it could give you greater control over how you adjust and place objects, something that I definitely found frustrating at times. I didn't finish the game, but I do think it seemed interesting enough that I'll check it out again eventually. Though this one is definitely far more a puzzle game than a photography game. If you want probably the peak of perspective puzzle games, you're gonna want to play Viewfinder, a game where your camera truly controls perspective. In the game, you have a Polaroid camera, and with it, you're able to photograph and replicate environments by placing images back into the world. With this, you're able to get rid of obstacles, build stairs and bridges, flip perspectives on things, copy objects. It's all pretty brilliant, and while the camera is simply point and shoot, I don't think anything else plays with perspective better than this game. It's such a fascinating use of the frame and feels really great when you get it working. In a lot of ways, I think the experience, the process that you go through, almost emulates photography in a sort of comparable abstract way. If you're photographing a live event where it's important to capture specific people or be aware of things in your environment, you have to have such a complete concept of the space around you, and what's close to you, what's far from you, where the light sources are, and what their temperature is for trying to balance them. Viewfinder doesn't consider these principles of photography directly, but it has the same sort of depth of approach with how you interact in the world and solve puzzles. The only downside is that as brilliant as the game is, it knows it and it wants to shove it down your throat. I'm not the first person to comment on the dialogue in this game, but it truly is abysmal. I tried to go in with an open mind, and I did not make it long before I ended up turning all of the dialogue off. Both the writing and the direction that the voice actors were given feels so self-aggrandizing. I could not stand it. I've never had a game so immediately destroy my goodwill and excitement to it before. It's fine if you just mute it. I will probably return and finish the whole game at some point, but I will say when I first started playing it, it really went from, oh wow, this is such an amazing game, such a brilliant concept, to, okay, how much do I have to play of this before I have enough footage captured and I can write a section and move on? And believe it or not, we're actually getting pretty much to the end here. There's a few odds and ends that I didn't really find a place for, like Tokyo Snap, a game where you capture street fashion, FOMO, a game where you photograph and sell your stuff so you can go to GDC, ISA, a game where you take pictures for a calendar, Storm Chasers, I guess I could have put this in animal photography, but a tornado isn't an animal, Shishingo, a game where you take pictures and learn Japanese, but that's pretty much it. We've really explored everything there is when it comes to photography games. In summation, this is what we're looking at with our timeline. Nessie, Bishoujo Shashinkin, Lady Safari, Safari Guns, Gekibo Gekisha Boy, Date Girl Virtual Reality, Paparazzi, Dinosaur Safari, Virtual Safari, Pokémon Snap, Ibiza Babe Watch, Gekisha Boy 2, Fatal Frame / Project Zero, Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly, Paparazzi, Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy, Fatal Frame 3, I forget the title of this one, Shoot the Bullet, Finder Love, Wild Earth African Safari, Zoom, Paparazzi in Action, Snapshot Adventures Secret of Bird Island, Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, Afrika, Tropical Dream Double Spoiler, Idolmaster Games, Sonic Homie Communication with Sonico, Spirit Camera, Project Zero 2 Wii Edition, Snapshot, Reef Shot, Dread Out, Project Zero Maiden of Blackwater, Shutter, Natsuro High School Sheshun Hakusho. It's a creepy game. 1000 Heads Among the Trees, 1979 Revolution Black Friday, Dread Out Keepers of the Dark, Snapshot, We Become What We Behold, Freedom Through a Lens, Violet Detector, 1111 War Retold, FOMO, Storm Chasers, Embedded, Randy's Camera, Tokyo Snap, Off the Rails, Morels The Hunt, Brukel, Offo, UFO, On Tape, First Contact, Torapon, Dread Out 2, Beckus, Umurangi Generation, Cellular Harvest, Penko Park, Shutter 2, Photo World, Alba, I forget, Alba Island Adventures, Dear Future, Spectrogram, New Pokemon Snap, Photo World, Smooth Corners, Beasts of Maravilla Island, Alicon, Hauntsville, Casual Birder, Tome, Paparazzi this time, Photogenic Minds Identity, Marvelous Bird Photography, Once Again, ISO, or maybe ISO, Isle of Pan, Season, A Letter to the Future, ISA, Calendar Photo Shoot, Somerholm, Interior Worlds, Shutter, Viewfinder, Shutter Seeker, Flutter Away, After Dream, Photo Shooter, Shashingo, Learn Japanese, Morels 2, The Hunt, Weird Meese, The Last Explorer, Down the Mountain, Mystery Meat, Shutterbug, Shutter Stroll, Photogeist Albums, Paragnosia, Froggies at the Zoo, Lushfoil Photo Sim, Foamography, Heartworm, I'm including Heartworm now, Photo Studio Simulator, Photographer's Life Simulator, Photo Capture, Ritorno al Daguerreotipo, and any more that came out while I was just reading off this list. And that's it, right? That's gotta be it. Please, let that be it. And that really was supposed to be the end. This was going to be just my closing segment. I was just going to add a little bit saying that I think Heartworm actually is a photography game. I was maybe a little bit too harsh on it because some of the other games that I ended up just kind of throwing in there pretty much have as much or as little photography as Heartworm does. I think it's just over the threshold. The line is so arbitrary anyways. There's also another game I forgot to mention that's also called Paparazzi, which is like a 2-player, kind of like a hide and seek type of deal. I don't know how I ended up finding this one because, again, as I've mentioned 100 times, don't name your game Paparazzi. It turns out I missed something pretty important. Something that needs to go right at the start of the timeline. Nessie is not actually the first photography game. I've made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry, Tom. I'm gonna have an email that I need to send out. This is Anata Wa Mei Cameraman, a game released by Hudson Soft in 1983, a year before Nessie was published. When exactly it was published is a mystery to me. I tried to track down at least a specific month, but I really had no luck there. Hudson Soft is no more. It's been consumed by Konami, and I never heard back from them when I reached out. If I had to guess, somewhere out there's probably a Japanese publication that could clarify it more, probably an old magazine that maybe has been archived, but I do not know how to search the Japanese internet. The game itself ran on Sharp computers, and you could actually get it on a cassette, so you didn't have to type out the entire game in order to be able to play it. In the game, you're seeking out and photographing different animals. You're awarded different points for which ones you capture in your lens, and it really is kind of uncanny to return back to such an early early game after all this time. I mean, I was just looking at complex 3D worlds and being able to do crazy things like use buttons on a controller. This game does seem a little bit more complex than Nessie, which is kind of funny because it came out earlier, but I think a lot of that can be attributed to the nature of the games themselves. Nessie is a type-in game. The very construction of the game is influenced by the way that you're going to have to type everything out. If it was any more complex, it would take you so much longer. There's more room for error when you're typing it in. It just makes sense to have them kind of exist within a certain level of simplicity, versus a game that comes on a cassette can kind of be as complex as it can get. And while this game is interesting, there actually is another one even earlier, Safari, published in April of 1979. This makes the game almost 50 years old at this point. Like Nessie, Safari was also published on paper, this time in the soft side magazine for the TRS-80 computer. And let me tell you, I tried very hard to track down a physical copy of this. I really want to be able to physically show you the very first photography game as it was published. But tracking this thing down has proved to currently be impossible. I've looked on eBay pretty much every day since I discovered it, which has been a couple of weeks at this point, and I've found other soft side magazines, but this one issue just seems to elude me. I even messaged one of the sellers that had multiple copies saying, hey, maybe you got this one, but they never got back to me. Thankfully, again, there are digital archives, so we're able to look at it as it was. In the game Safari, each player is in charge of a safari camp and must organize filming parties, including camera crews and bearers to search the vast 169 region safari country for wild animals. Scoring is accomplished when you successfully film in a region containing an animal. The player with the most film contract points at the end of the game gets the big movie contract, and along with it, the useful fame and fortune. Now, there is kind of a question in the back of my mind here that is this just an Oregon Trail game, but with like a photo theme and no actual camera that would maybe disqualify it from being a camera game? Well, looking in the magazine, we can see photos that were printed of the game running on the computer. These are probably some of the earliest screenshots. And it's hard to tell, but reading on, it states, the scoring takes place when you journey into a region that contains a wild animal. At the time, the video screen will display a camera lens and the animal. You must position the lens so that the animal is inside the viewfinder. Then shoot the film. To move the camera lens, press the arrow on the keyboard which corresponds to the direction you want to go. In order to expose the film, press enter. I think that seals it. There was one video I was able to watch of it being played, but I don't have a TRS-80. Do you know anyone that has a TRS-80? If you do, tell them to play this game. So there you go. The true timeline here starts with Safari, and then Anata Wa Mei Cameraman, and then Nessie. These early three games all seem to have a lot of similarities with each other, and I truly think there is no ill intention here. It seems to be, I think the term is simultaneous discovery. There's only kind of so many ways that you can invent a camera for a computer game back in the 80s and late 70s. So I don't think anyone plagiarized or anything like that. I think that would be kind of a ridiculous accusation. This last minute discovery does kind of beg the question though, is there something else even earlier than this? Something that we're possibly missing? Something forgotten that wasn't archived? Well, it's certainly possible that something else just slipped through the cracks. One area that I was kind of sensitive to was arcade cabinets. I made sure to double check that there wasn't anything released before 1979 that could kind of qualify as a photography game, but as far as I could see on online registries or online Wikipedias of arcade games, nothing seemed to come close. Also though, searching the term arcade photography game is not very helpful. It tends to generate a lot more images and links to photo booths than anything else. There are some other areas that I've mentioned that have been kind of neglected, phone games being one of them, flash games or something I just really couldn't touch on. There's also physical camera attachments and implements that some games have, the Game Boy camera, the Kinect, the PlayStation iToy or Spy Toy, whatever it's called. Those would be a whole different category of game. games. Maybe I'll touch on those in the future. Maybe I'll update this video in 5 years when there's inevitably 50 or 100 more games added to the genre. We're only gonna see this number go up as more and more games get made, and that's something I do actually look forward to. I would say, other than Pokemon Snap and like Fatal Frame, a lot of the best entries have come in the last like 5 or 6 years. If I had to give my recommendations for which games are the most worth checking out, in no particular order, the first ones you should look at would be Tome, the original Pokemon Snap, Umurangi Generation, and Paparazzi. I think those are absolutely the most fun, the ones that I had the most enjoyment with. Oh, I also forgot about Lushfoil. Lushfoil is a really good one. Tome is probably my personal favorite, just given the fact that I ended up beating it in my free time when I wasn't working on the video. Pokemon Snap is just such a classic. Fatal Frame is enjoyable, but horror isn't as much my thing. And Pupperazzi is just, it's super charming. Games kind of a step below those, I would put Viewfinder, which was still really good, but man, just a little bit abysmal to play through because of that dialogue. I think that's the end of this video. I think I need to be done with it. I've been working on this way longer than I intended to. The video, as you can tell from watching it, if you got to this point, which thank you for watching, is a pretty long video. So I'm gonna finish editing this and then never think about taking another picture again in my life. So thank you so much to my patrons. Their names are probably over here. Thank you so much to these patrons for supporting me and helping me make this video possible. If you want your name in the credits right here in future videos, you can go check out my Patreon. There are behind the scenes. There's not going to be one for this video right away because I got to get it out, but there's behind the scenes for other videos in the past, and I'll probably make one for this one in the future, but I don't want to sit on this video any longer. It's been like 2 months that I've been actively working on it and like 2 years that I've been kind of working on it. So as you can tell, I may be going a little bit crazy. I'm kind of starting to ramble. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.